All right, how's everyone doing tonight? You all hear me? Okay, so I always like to get a sense of who's in the room. So how many of you are already familiar with the word lead startup? I know this is the first meeting. So how many of you know what lead startup is? Okay, it's about half of you, okay? And how many of you are in a startup, in a larger company, professor, academic, services, consultant? Okay, I think we covered everyone. Okay, got a good mix of everyone in here. That's always good to know. So I like to often start out by a brief introduction, and I tell people that above everything else, I'm a practicing entrepreneur. So I happen to have written a book. We have 2 copies of books to give for the best questions asked. So I get asked a lot of questions, so you have to ask really hard questions. And we'll give books out to those when we start the question answer. So I'm going to walk you through a brief overview of what this whole process is about, but I'll start with the real problems we're trying to solve. So as entrepreneurs, we all face this challenge, is that most products fail, most startups fail, and in general, most products fail, so not just in a startup, but even in larger companies. Now, the interesting statistic, though, is not so much the failure rate, but the fact that the companies and the entrepreneurs that succeed do this by drastically changing plans along the way. So what they start out with, this myth of the perfect idea, is really a myth. What we start out with is not really where we end up. So that's the key message here. And so what that tells us is that what separates success from failure is not so much perfection or finding that perfect business model, business plan, but finding a plan that works. And the key part here is going to be before running out of resources. So we want to do all of this before we run out of time, money, effort, hope, all of those kinds of things. And so that's what this whole process is about. Now, I'm going to take a step back and talk about why this process is so hard, why starting products are so hard. And the first one that I want to touch on is this myth of the visionary entrepreneur. So when we as entrepreneurs look at our products, the things we are most in love with is the solution box. And you've seen Daniel present the business model canvas. I'm going to kind of expose that more iteratively. You'll see like pieces of it to tell a story and talk about these problems. So when we look at our business model canvas or the lean canvas, what we really fall in love with is the solution box. And that's what we're most passionate about. Down below, I have a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. Even he, when he had built something that was really taking off, thought it was just a side project, thought it was just a hobby, that for some reason investors gave him money, he moved to Silicon Valley, but one day he was going to grow up and quit that job and start a real company. So even he didn't believe he had a real business on his hands. So in some cases, what we think is awesome becomes awesome for a lot of people, like in Mark Zuckerberg's case, but for a lot of us, it doesn't, and those are the odds that are stacked against us. So to be successful, you have to be a lot more deliberate and redefine what the true product is, and I'll come to that in a second. The second reason why startups and products are hard is that product development actually gets in the way of learning. This one is a little bit counterintuitive, so I'll explain it. So if you look at the traditional way we build products, we have sort of this staged approach. We go out and we gather some requirements, we do some development to build the product, we go away for a long time where we're building products, we're doing testing, and at some point we release the product out to market. Now there's a study that was done in Silicon Valley, and what they found is that most products fail not because they fail to build what they set out to build, but because they waste needless time, money, and effort building the wrong product. So they fail to find the right customers and markets for those products. So it's not so much product risk, but market risk and customer risk. So if you see where we address those risks, we do some of that in the beginning. So we go and gather some requirements. We have some fuzzy ideas of what we need to go build. But most of the learning happens only after we release the products. There's this big middle where we spend a lot of time, and I'm talking a lot, like months, sometimes years, where we are building and perfecting our product. And when we launch, that's really where the real learning begins. And we realize we've gone astray and either build the wrong features or build too many features or the wrong product entirely. And so then we have to course correct, and that's a very expensive mistake we have to go back and fix. So in this whole process, we want to avoid that. We don't want to go away for years or months. We want to find faster ways to involve the customer in a continuous feedback loop while we're building the products. This last point is also key, and that is we all talk about how customers are important and we need to listen to customers, but you have to know how to talk to them. And so oftentimes when I bring up this code, a lot of people nod their heads and say, yeah, that's why I don't like talking to customers, is that they aren't visionary. They can't tell us what to go build. But we fail to realize that that's not the customer's job. And Steve Jobs said that well. It's not the customer's job to know what they want. That's all of our jobs as entrepreneurs. So if we go back to this code, what the customer is really saying is that they're unhappy with their existing solution, which happens to be a horse and it happens to be slow. They're not telling us what to go do about it. They're just saying, this is my current reality. I'm not happy with a slow horse. And so as an entrepreneur, you need to go find the right solution to that problem. It could be genetically engineering faster horses, which could have been a possible solution. But in this case, it was easier for them to go and mass produce the automobile. So Ford went and mass produced the automobile and solved the problem this way. So that's what we need to think of when we're talking to customers. It's not so much to ask them what they want, what they want us to go build, but rather pull it out from them by understanding their pains and problems and worldviews. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to kind of build on the story. So when we look at our when we look at our products, I already talked about how we look at the solution box, but the thing that keeps us up at night is how do we fund this creative addiction. We want to go build this great product. All entrepreneurs want to build great products, but we also need resources to do that. So how do we fund that? We often turn to people with bags of money. These are either external investors or they're people that are gatekeepers of the budgets in our companies. And so we go to them, and oftentimes what we do is we pitch the solution to them. We tell them how great the technology is, what it is we're going to go build, and it falls on deaf ears. There's kind of a cross against that heart because that's not what these guys are in the business for. They're in this for one reason and one reason alone, and that's to make a return on their investment. So they don't look at your business all about your solution. What they want to know is, show me evidence, show me any evidence of traction, which is engagement with your idea with people other than yourself. So I know you're in love with your idea, but are there other people, apart from your friends and your spouse and your mom, are there other people who care about this? Are there other people using this? Are there other people paying you for this product? So they want that kind of evidence. They want to know where are the margins. So if you go and build this thing, where is the business model economics going to come from? How much does it cost you to build this? What does it cost to make this thing? What are you going to charge for it? Where is the business model scalability story? They don't care who your customers are, but they care how many they are. So how big is this problem? How many people are going to be affected? What impact are you going to have? And finally, how are you going to defend against competition? So assuming you're successful and people start copying you, which they will, how are you going to keep them at bay? How are you going to defend against that competition? So what is your defensibility story or your unfair advantage? Now, the thing that gets the conversation going is traction. If you go into any investor's office, I don't care who it is, and you show them a hockey stick curve, and so this is a curve that's starting to take off, and it's got users or even better revenue or even better profit, and you go into any investor's office, irrespective of what they invest in, they're going to want to know more about what you're doing, and maybe they'll invest if they're the right investor, but maybe they won't. You'll also have a lot of leverage if you've got the hockey stick curve. So that's the power of traction. Investors care about traction over everything else. So let's talk about traction. Traction is nothing more than engagement of your product with your customers and your market. So instead of going after big bags of money, it's the logical conclusion that we should go after customers first. Let's get a few customers, and that shows evidence that we've got something that could be working even at small scale. Now, when we go talk to customers, we make the same exact mistake. We start by pitching our solution, and that also is something customers don't care about. So customers don't care about your solution. They care about their problems. If you think about that for a moment, we are all customers of some kind of service. All of you have smartphones. You all woke up today, but you didn't have this burning desire to go and buy an iPhone app or an Android app just for the sake of it, just for fun. Maybe you wanted to come here and you wanted directions, or you wanted to get cheap fares. You had a problem you wanted to solve, and that's why you probably went to the App Store or the Android store looking for an app. But you don't just say, I'm going to buy an app that was written in Java or Ruby on Rails or some technology like that. That's not how we buy things, or that's not how we look for things. And that's what we entrepreneurs we actually fail to understand, because we go and pitch our solution, and that's a lot about how the stuff was made, not so much the finished benefit. So what we should instead be doing is talking about the intersection of the problem and the solution, which is the value proposition or the unique value proposition, and that's the promise that you make. So go into the finished story benefit. If you're selling a job board where you help people find jobs, don't talk about the features that are going to differentiate you. Talk about the benefit you're going to have after they use your service. So promise people their dream job in 60 days or less, and start the conversation with them instead of telling them how great your network is or how great your features are. And so the best way to kind of explain this concept even further, which kind of works here, is if you think of sausage. A lot of people like to eat sausage, but we don't want to know how the sausage was made. Customers are the same way. They want to enjoy the end product, but if you tell them how it was made, it actually turns them off maybe, and they don't want to know all those details. And so in order to build a good a good unique value proposition, we sometimes have to understand our customers even better. So we have to go and understand who our customer segments are, even better the early adopters. So a good example here is Facebook. Facebook today has every possible customer segment on the planet, from small businesses to large businesses to students to people, to old people, young people, all kinds of people using Facebook. But they didn't start that way. They didn't start mainstream. They started with a very clear focus on who their early adopter was, which was a college student in the campus, and not just any college student, but a college student on the Harvard campus. And because they methodically rolled out from colleges to colleges and then to companies, I would argue that's why they're the largest social network on the planet. And we can get into more details later if we have time on that. And so it's very important to be able to know who you're marketing to, because if you market to everyone, you end up talking to no one. Now, if you get those two things right, if you have a strong promise and you have a clear message to who you're speaking to, the question the customer is going to have is, how much does this service or product cost? So what is that currency of exchange? Now, it could be actual money if you were selling something, if you're creating value for your customers, and as long as you capture less value than you create for them, you've got a fair transaction. People are happy to pay for things that allow them to make more money or save time, which is also translatable to money. That would be more like a B2B type value proposition. But if you were doing a multi-sided market where you were trying to create users who were participating, maybe getting getting entertainment or creating user-generated content, and as a result of that, you had a multi-sided market which you were monetizing in a different way, you create a derivative form of currency. So in those cases, your users are assets which you are then trading on a different market with your advertisers, say, and there's a value that you place on those users. Yeah.
You mentioned multi-sided market. I really find it very hard to apply Lean Startup to multi-sided markets like it.
Okay.
You can't MVP really.
That's not true. But so why do you think that?
I think that because you cannot generate like a minimal kind of value from places, marketplaces where you need both sides.
Sure.
WhatsApp. How do you want to MVP WhatsApp? You gotta have the awesome experience or you don't. So you want to MVP a Dropbox. Yeah. I know how Dropbox is.
I was going to say Dropbox was MVP.
Let's take something like that. Or what
Sure.
Paul is working on right now. They do a business app platform.
Well, so maybe I'll start more with like patterns. So if you're looking at a multi-sided market, unless it's like an ad-based business, so say you're trying to build a community, there are two sides to the equation. So advertisers are going to pay you, but I would say you want to start with the riskier side of the model. So to me, advertisers are not risky. There's a well-established market. If you can create enough, traction, if you can create enough engagement, there's a going rate for the advertiser marketplace. You can even pick up the phone and just say, hey, I've got a website with this kind of an audience and there's this much engagement, what would you pay for it? You can just make those calls and get those rates. So it's not that risky. The riskier part is how are you going to get people to your site, and what is that hook that you're going to get the users to come in and participate on. And that's what you build the MVP around. So you don't have to tackle both sides in that instance. Now, if you're in a marketplace model, that is definitely much more complicated. It's a series of simultaneous equations that you have to solve at the same time, because you have to get the buyers and the sellers to come and transact, and sometimes the incentives are different. So you have to create two canvases, one for the buyer side, one for the seller side. Those are much harder. And in those instances, too, there are a lot of hacks. So if you look at how Etsy and even, let's just take eBay. eBay now sells everything from cars to Pez dispensers, but they started with a very clear focus, again, early adopters. They started with collectibles, and they went and made sure that the people, both the supply side and the demand side, were taken care of. So they went, rather than going after every category, they went after just one or two categories and densely populated it, got the buyers and sellers together. And the big insight there, and this is the same thing Facebook had, is that it's not about creating a new marketplace. It's not about creating a new social network. It's about going into a pre-existing marketplace, ideally where transactions are already happening, and then you want to go in there and remove the friction in that market. So eBay makes it much easier to buy and sell stuff, but people would still buy and sell stuff without eBay. Craigslist does the same thing. So that's the key insight there, is that you want to figure out where is that transaction happening, build an MVP around them, and game it so that you bring the right supply and demand together and figure out which is the riskier side. And you can actually build simple MVPs around that, and then use that momentum to then go into and expand the marketplace or expand the social network. They all have the same kind of mechanics. Yep. Sure. Yeah, so if you wait a little bit, I'll get into some of the hows of how you do it. But that's a very good question. It's deserving of a book, so we'll get you a book. Do you have? Oh, oh yeah. If you want to pass the mic around, okay, I remember. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get the mic to you, and then that way you can ask the question, and you'll be on camera. So in this particular case, the thing that gets the customer's attention, so in the investor case, what gets their attention is strong traction. In this case, if you make a strong promise, you're going to get the customer's attention. So if you're a nightclub owner and I tell you I have a system for you to fill your nightclub every night, and I know you're not filling it up every night, you're going to pick up that phone and call me back. That's a strong promise. You don't care. You don't know how I'm going to do it, but you're going to call me back. And that's a little bit of the answer, is that you have to lead with a strong promise or a strong offer, and the right person in the company will find himself to make time. And I'll share more tactics on how you can get to that. So the reason I'm showing you all these different worldviews is to help to redefine the true job of the entrepreneur. So the true job of the entrepreneur is not to just build a great product. I'm not saying that's not important. I'm a technologist. I love to build great products. All of you do as well. But what we need to do is turn that solution, turn that vision of a product and deconstruct it. We have a vision of what we want to accomplish, but then we have the solution, which itself could be a question mark. It may not be the right solution for what we want to go do, because there's a lot of assumptions we're making. So instead of building this final solution, spending years to do it, we can actually come up with faster ways to test whether we're on the right track. And I'll talk about what some of those things are. Everything else on that business model that we're going to put on there is also a hypothesis. It's also a guess. We think we know they're right, but we have to go and test those things. If we are right, it should be easy to test, so it shouldn't be a big problem. But if you're wrong, that's where we can save months and thousands of euros in wasted effort. So that's kind of the big epiphany here, is that the solution isn't just the only product we're building as entrepreneurs, it's the entire business model. We're really building this company, and that's the true product. And so the true job of the entrepreneur is to then walk around this canvas. So we have all these question marks, and we systematically go around it and de-risk it over time. And the way we do this is through a series of conversations. So the first kind of conversations that I love to have when you start validating your business model is with customers. You want to go and understand who they are, what their pains are, what are they really doing to solve a problem today. Armed with that insight, you can then go and start formulating the right kinds of solutions. And so I'll spend a little bit more time getting into details on that. The second part here is we have conversations with our team, and so we have a rich vocabulary of accounting methods, innovation accounting methods. Traditionally, we only measured product success in two ways. Are we making money, and are we building more code, or are we building more product? And those were the only two measures of success. And those are both wrong measures, especially in the more innovative and the more early stage products, where you're not going to make money for a long time, and building stuff that's wrong is not going to be progress either. So we have to come up with other ways to measure progress, and that's what those conversations are all about. We have conversations with advisors, investors, the kind that I gave you a glimpse of. So investors and advisors aren't as interested with how we go solve problems, but more interested in the business model and what are the other aspects that we typically don't want to talk about. We also have conversations with competitors, and I put this one at the end, and that's because most entrepreneurs look at competition early and start to compete against people that may not be their competitors. And so instead of assuming you know who your competition is, go ask your customers. And this is the kind of the jobs to be done concept, and that was a great way to illustrate that. The competition of the milkshake wasn't another milkshake company, it were all these other breakfast foods. And so when you talk to your customers, they will tell you what you are really competing against, not who you think your competition is. So that's the message there. So a little bit about myself. I've been an entrepreneur for many years. I've built lots of products along the way. Some were successful, some weren't. The reason I got into all of this is because my cycle time going from idea to knowing whether my product was going to succeed or fail was just very long. I was spending a year and a half to 2 years to get to that point. And so I was in search for better, faster ways for finding. I had lots of ideas. I wanted to find better, faster ways for vetting those ideas. And that's how I got into a lot of this. I ran into the early works of Steve Blank, Ries. A lot of what they were saying resonated with me, and so I started my own experimentation on their principles, on their ideas, and kind of evolved the work. And I'll show you some of those principles here in the work that I did. So a few disclaimers I'd like to put out there is that I'm very much of a first-hand experiential learner. There's going to be a little bit of theory here, and most of it is all practical learning. So practical learning by building products of my own. Over the last 4 years, I've been fortunate to work with thousands of entrepreneurs around the world, building all kinds of products, applying these techniques and seeing what works, what doesn't work, coming up with principles that are more universal, coming up with tactics that are more specific. And I'll kind of try to distinguish between the two as we go along. So there are no silver bullets here. There is no magic process. If there was a magic process, I wouldn't be here telling you about it, because I would be investing in all kinds of startups of my own, because I would have this guarantee magic bullets secret of success. So there is no magic bullet, but what this technique or this methodology will help you do is confidently, I can say, raise your odds of success, because it's all about faster feedback loops. Rather than spending months building something and realizing it's not going to work, you can get that feedback sometimes in hours or days, and you don't have to wait that long. So this is a point where I want you to separate your principles from tactics. So there are going to be 3 meta principles I'm going to cover, and I find those are universal. They can be applied to any kind of product, but then the tactics themselves tend to be a lot more specific. So if you're in B2B, you're going to do certain things. If you're in a B2C application, you're going to do certain things, hardware, software, and we'll have lots of case studies now where we can talk about those tactical things. We wouldn't have time to do that today, but I'm happy in the question and answer afterwards to get as tactical as needed. So how do you do all of this? So I wouldn't be an entrepreneur if I don't plug the book. So I have written a book on this, 250 pages of tactical techniques and ways to go do this. But I'm going to summarize that today by highlighting the high-level principles. So what are the 3 meta principles that go into this process? So the first one is one of documenting your plan A. And I just started by saying that most plan A's are not going to work, but it's still important to write down what your initial plan is because of this statement right here. And that's because as entrepreneurs, we are especially gifted at creating these reality distortion fields. We can convince ourselves, given a little bit of information, that we are always right. So if you launch a product in the summer months and it doesn't sell, well, it's obviously because everyone's on vacation. And if it doesn't sell in the fall, it's because everyone's coming back from vacation. And then it's the holidays, and so by that logic, there's never any time to really sell a good product, or there's never a good time to sell a product. So we can always rationalize bad news and convince ourselves that we just have to give ourselves more time and things will turn around. And so we want to avoid that by being a lot more deliberate. And the first line in the sand that you need to draw is around your vision, is around your business model. So Daniel did a good job of introducing what that business plan is. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. But maybe just a show of hands, how many of you have written a business plan before? So that's not as popular as people are nodding their heads. Keep your hands up if you enjoy the process. So actually 1 person, yeah. So there's always 1 or 2 people in a room. And so I would say the business plan is a good exercise for the entrepreneur, because it's about getting outside that solution box. Like we all think all we have to do is build a great product. The problem is the format is all wrong. The people who make you write this, typically the investors, don't take the time to read it itself because they know it's a bunch of guesses. It's not going to really work this way. But they want you to come in and give them a more distilled, condensed version. That's what the idea of the business model is. It's a 1-page document. This is the Lean Canvas format. It's a little bit different than the Osterwalder Canvas, which I'll kind of highlight here with the differences. So there are some differences that I made. So I made I made this to be a derivative work because I find the Osterwalder Canvas to be a lot more strategic. So if you are a bigger company, or if you've got things like key resources, key assets, and you think more strategically, you can put it all together. I take a more customer problem-driven approach. So if you think about who your customers are, what their problems are, what products you need to go build to solve those problems, that's where the Lean Canvas paradigm really comes in from. At the end of the day, I don't draw a distinction between either canvas. The enemy is not one canvas versus the other. It's really writing a 60-page business plan, which is going to take you 6 weeks or 8 weeks to do, that no one's going to read. That's a waste of time. Or doing no planning. So those that said they didn't write anything, that's not any better either. Because if you don't do any plan, while you can iterate very quickly in your head, you run into that reality distortion field. You can always convince yourself that you're on the right track, and that's even worse than not writing anything down. And so there is a longer blog post here about what these changes are. I'm not going to go into details. I know some of you know what the original canvas is. There are these, I've highlighted the differences, but there's a longer post on what the specific changes are and why I made those changes. But we'll kind of move on. So the basic idea here is one of, the second meta principle is taken from the product development playbook. If you were going to build a very hard technical product, you wouldn't start out with what is easiest, because if you start with what's easiest, when the deadline comes around, you would be thrashing like crazy because there'd be a lot of hard stuff to do. But with our businesses, we tend to forget that. We usually start with what comes easy to us, which is going and prototyping a solution or building the solution. But as I mentioned, the bigger risk is not so much can we build something these days, because we can build almost anything given enough time, money, effort with the tools we have today. The bigger question is, will anyone buy this today? So we have to flip that around and test what is riskier, not necessarily what is easier. So building successful products is all about systematic risk mitigation, and that's what this process is about. So people often ask me in the Lean Canvas, where is the risk box? And the answer is simple. Everything on here is a risk. Everything in here is uncertain, but not all risks are created equal. So to understand that, we'll go into a staged approach of building products. So I look at all products as going through 3 stages. The first stage is all about problem-solution fit, and the key question we're asking here is, do we even have a problem worth solving? So do we know who our customers are? Do they really have problems that we are addressing? Is there monetizable pain there? Those are the 3 basic questions we're trying to ask. And the key part here is that you don't have to even build a product. So this kind of comes to the question of how do you get attention of customers. You don't even have to build a product to answer this question. It can take you a few weeks of interviewing and talking to customers, but you can test a problem's demand customer pull without having to build or write a single line of code or build any product. And the answers are right here. So if you look at this, customers don't care about your solution. If you can go and have them wave this magic wand and imagine the solution is there, you can test a lot of things without having the solution in their hands. And so the way we do this is not with a product, but with something I call the offer. And so the offer is a proxy of the product, and it's made up of 3 things. One is the unique value proposition, which is what is this product going to let them do? So that is the promise that you're making. The next thing is the demo. So if you can convince them, if you can nail their problem, if I go to that nightclub owner and I tell him I can solve your nightclub problem, I can fill your nightclub every single night. His obvious next question is going to be, how am I going to do that? So I have to demonstrate that. So that's what the demo is about. And the demo doesn't have to be a working product. It can be a verbal description. In that case, I can just describe what my idea is, and you can either accept it or not. In some cases, I can create screenshots. I can create I can create a video. I can create a physical prototype that people can play with. So that's the idea of the demo. It's not the built product, but it's just something that's enough so the customer can visualize your solution. And then we also want to test pricing. So once you can show these 3 elements, here's what I'm going to do for you, here's what a demo of it looks like, so you can visualize how I solve the problem, how I get you from point A to point B, and this is what it's going to cost you. You then ask them, are you going to be my customer or not? And it's really that simple. And you can do all of this, as I said, without writing any product, any software, any building anything. And so there are generally 3 ways, and we're not going to get into details here, of building offers. One is this mafia offer, and it's not what you think. It's not twisting your customer's arm. It's creating an offer they can't refuse. And there are techniques for doing this. You go and first understand what customers' needs are, and then you go and build this demo that's so compelling, it's priced so right, that they just can't help but say yes. And that's where that name, the mafia offer, comes from. There are other kinds of offers you can create. Smoke test offers are testing demand, and pre-order offers are like Kickstarter type campaigns where you put a product demo out there and you get people to buy before you've actually built it. And if you get enough people buying, it funds the development of your first batch. Once you have the offer, what you're really trying to do here is not promise the world. So you have to, this idea of the MVP is very important, is you want to strip it down. You don't want to build something that's the full product. You want to find what is that smallest solution you can build that also delivers customer value, which is my definition of the MVP. So some people use MVP very loosely for things like teaser pages and demos and other things. I call all of those things offers, but for me the MVP has to be a product. It has to be something you put in the customer's hand. It doesn't have to be your final product. It can be a more creative kind of an MVP. So things like the concierge MVP. So if you are trying to build a product, say you were trying to build a real estate software product, you could actually become a consultant for a little while and learn a lot about the customers, deliver value to them. Remember, customers care about the value, not how you deliver that value. So you can first become a consultant and deliver value very quickly, and then afterwards you can follow up with your actual software product. And as a bonus, if you can capture some of that value, so if you go in and deliver value, that's the main directive of the MVP. If you can capture that back, which is a fancy way of saying getting paid, I'm a big advocate of testing pricing, charging from day one, because that is one of your most fundamental assumptions in your business model. We know we can give away free cookies, but there's no business in free. You have to be able to create a business model that's going to work, and so you might as well start testing that sooner rather than later. Once you can do all of that, once you've got this problem solution fit, so you have an offer that your customers are accepting and you have the minimum viable product definition, we then get into the second phase where we actually build out this minimum viable product and we go and test the business model in small scale. And this is a key point here as well. Facebook didn't have to launch Facebook to the entire universe, the entire world, and then convince their investors that we have built something valuable. They did this by just doing it on the Harvard campus first, and then 2 or 3 other universities, and they raised a lot of money at a very big valuation. And that's because they could demonstrate the mechanics of going over and taking over a college campus faster than any other social network could do. They could, in 30 days, get almost every college student, 80% of the population, on Facebook, and 70% of them logging in every single day. And it was not just on 2 or 3 campuses. They had a system for doing this. So they could go campus by campus and repeat this over and over again. They then went to their investors and said, Facebook is not just for college students. We can also get the more grown crowd. So let's go to companies and demonstrate the same mechanics. So they went to a few companies and they got them on Facebook, and they were using it every single day. And they went to their investors and got even higher valuations. So then they could paint this picture where they could extrapolate Facebook being used by everyone on the planet, and that's really what they've been able to accomplish today. So the key message here is that you don't need to be at scale to be able to demonstrate your business model working. You can measure your business model working at even micro scale. And once you can do that, you then shift gears and go into the scaling stage, which is all about accelerating growth. So this is where you have something working, and now your focus shifts less about product and more about the growth strategies. What are those engines of growth? You've probably heard of things like growth hacking. What are those tactics to be able to trigger those engines to be able to grow your business model to its maximum potential? So that's what this whole 3 stages is about, and the way we do all of this is through running experiments. Yeah. Yeah, hold on.
One of the most cases you have to write a business plan in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The business plan of the business model is all about plan A. And you write a business plan, you collect the money, you have the seed money, you collect the money, and then afterwards, kind of create a prototype or a demo to the customers. What happens? Worst case when it doesn't work out. I mean, because the business plan doesn't contain plan B. You talk to customers, and they're all telling you the idea is great.
Yeah.
Investors telling you the idea is great, but what happens when the plan doesn't work out?
Yeah, so this whole process is about running rapid experimentation. So let me cover this section. So it's not about running these big loops. So if you have 6 months, say you have 6 months of runway, the old way would be, let me spend all 6 months to build my product, and maybe I'll do a little bit of learning in the 5th month, and oh my God, this is not what the customer wanted. I've run out of money. I need to go beg my investors for more money. This is not about that. This is about, in that 6-month period, rather than running one big experiment, let's go and run 10 experiments or 60 experiments or 600 experiments, so that in month 1 you will know this is not going to work. You can conserve your resources and go do something course correct along the way. So let's talk about what an experiment is. This is the Lean Startup Build, Measure, Learn loop that Ries drew almost 4 or 5 years ago. This is what codifies what an experiment is. So we start with ideas, we build something. I show the word product here, but it doesn't have to be a full product. It can be a proxy of the product. So all things like a customer interview, a teaser page, a demo, all those can be proxies that can stand in for your product. Anything that anything you can put in front of customers to collect data from them, qualitative or quantitative. So qualitative would be interviews, quantitative would be metrics driven. Based on that, we get some learning, and that learning is what drives this loop. So three very important aspects. We have to be going fast, so we have to go fast around this loop. So this is no different than traditional product development, except in traditional product development, we run one big release cycle. So we get some ideas, requirements, we go build the full product, we go launch it, we learn that the customers maybe don't want this, and then we come back and try again. Very expensive, and you run out of resources doing that. What we want to do here is go very, very fast. So can we find faster ways to test things? So before you even launch your product, can you go and put a landing page and show customers what this will look like and get their email addresses? Things like that. Yeah.
Basically about the customer development process. Is it about speed, or is it about iterations, pivots? Because Steve Blank has written on his homepage that at the core of the customer development process, he has the idea from John Boyd,
yeah.
a strategist, and he said he took his OODA loop, because this OODA loop, it's observe, orient,
yeah.
desire, and action, something like that. And yeah, he put this to bring the idea of the customer development process. But is it about speed, or is it about iterations? What about is it?
Yeah, so in my mind, there are three things here. You have to have speed. So speed is very important, and I'll tell you why it is in kind of a different slide. Learning is very important. This learning cannot just be learning about product. It has to be customer-based learning. So it's not about in 6 months we have built this great product and we are very proud of it, but rather in 6 months we have built this great product and we have got hundreds of customers using it. So it has to be customer-based learning. And then equally important is focus. You have to focus on the right kinds of experiments. You can't just go and run all kinds of random experiments. And this is why these are the three things that I find to be most important when you're designing experiments. Because if you're just going fast and you're focused, but you're not learning from customers, this is where the image of a dog chasing its tail comes to mind. So you're randomly trying stuff. Maybe you'll get lucky, but you're going around in circles most of the time. If you're not going fast, but you're learning and you're focused on the right things, you run the risk of running out of resources. So it takes you too long to come to market, or even worse, you get a competitor, a fast follower, to enter the market and say, thank you very much for validating this idea for us, we're going to take it from here, and they take the market away from you. And that is a very common thing that happens. So speed is absolutely important. And then you also need to be wary of this last problem, which actually is a problem that happens with more funded teams. So if you've got a lot of resources, we tend to make everyone busy, and so we try to do a lot of things in planning for the future, and so we do a lot of premature optimization. So this is where you're going fast, you're learning, but you're not focused on the right activities. So you might be prematurely scaling your servers, or prematurely scaling your marketing or your landing pages or your Salesforce organization, but if you don't yet have a product worth selling, all that is a form of waste. So we don't want to do those kinds of things. So when I look at the core elements of running effective experiments, you have to have all three elements: speed, learning, and focus, to be able to create that optimal learning loop. Any other questions on that? Yeah.
I want to ask, during this process, the human source, is there any, like, or creating a team, or with who I have to work, what I have to do, is there an also lean way for this thing?
Yeah, so the question was, how about creating teams? What is the emphasis on that? So in my book, I talk about how they are really, at the beginning, at the early stages of a startup, there are really three core elements that you have to have together. You have to be able to build stuff, you have to be able to design stuff, because we live in a more and more design-centric world, and you have to be able to market and sell stuff. So I put marketing and sales as one task. Now, when you talk about teams, it doesn't have to be 3 separate people. It could be 10 people if you need those many resources. It could be a single person. There are a lot of single-founder companies where one founder can do all 3 things. They can create landing pages, they can design them well enough, and they can get the product built as well. Now, so I would say that you don't necessarily, so I wouldn't describe it in terms of numbers of people, but you definitely need to have all core competencies. Now, with this process, it does get challenging because you have inside the building activities and outside the building activities. And so it's hard to do those kinds of things together. And so it definitely helps to at least have 2 people, but sometimes more.
Working, like you start earning money?
Yeah.
And then where to focus on what to do? Is there also...
Sure,
like, because you're alone then, or like with your team members, and the questions you can ask only yourself, yeah?
You can ask yourself. Sorry.
Means like what to do now? What is the next step?
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
there any?
Yeah, so I would say that the whole idea with this methodology is that you're going to use all kinds of feedback loops, both from your customers. Once you start to get into scale, you've got the added advantage of getting metrics. You can start to model and measure the performance of your system, of your business, and that's going to guide you on what's working, what's not working. And so there's a whole process here. We're not going to get into a lot of those details, but there's a whole way of measuring analytics, measuring metrics, and all of that. The experiments you run are going to be driven, your actions are going to be prioritized by those kinds of things. So it's a very quick example. If I was trying to sell to enterprise, as a founder, I might be able to go and sell the first enterprise, but I know that I have to get a sales force to be able to scale that out. So that becomes something that I then go and do as the second or third stage in my product evolution. And the same thing happens if I'm doing a B2C product. At some point, Mark Zuckerberg didn't build the whole Facebook by himself. He had to go hire a team to fill in the gaps, to address some of those scaling needs and address some of those marketing needs and all those other features that they had to do to make this thing really work.
Check out leanteam.org.
Leanteam.org. Okay. So this is the last slide, and then if there's still time, I can do a short case study, but this is the last slide that captures the overview of the methodology. So I show a bunch of canvases here, and it's not just one, because what we want to do is try to avoid what we call in computer science the local maxima trap. So if we just go with one particular idea and one particular iteration of that idea or one particular vision of that idea, we can go and execute that and maybe get some success. But if we look around with a little bit more effort, we might have found another opportunity, another market, which could have been a lot more successful. So when you're doing these initial lean canvases or business model canvases, it's important to look for variability. So ask a lot of what-if questions. What if I change my customer segments? How does this whole business model canvas or lean canvas change? And so when you do that exercise, some of those business models are going to be a little crazy because you're really brainstorming. So you can eliminate those off the bat. I tend to prioritize the top 3 business models and not more than that to begin with. So take your top 3 business models and work it through the process. So the next step is identifying what's riskiest. It's not always building product. You may have technical feasibility issues, so you have to go figure that out. But oftentimes it could be other things like channel risk or market risk, pricing risk. So what you want to go and find ways to test that out. And then we go through the whole process of running those problem interviews where we understand the problem of the customers. Along the way, you might be eliminating some of those canvases. So when you go talk to your customer segments, they look at you and say, well, I don't have that problem. I mean, it's a good idea, but maybe I'll use it if you build it. And that's automatic disqualification. If they don't have an active need for what you're trying to do, then they may not be the best customer segment to go build a business around. So you want to go and find someone else. So you may rule out things that way. When you go and show them a demo, maybe part of your demo is the price, and you show them the price and they almost fall off their chair because it's too expensive for them, you might eliminate the customer segment that way because you need to sell at a certain price to make the business model work. Yeah. Don't we improve the, sorry, Kwas?
Why Xing them out instead of improving them?
Well, because, so the question is why do we eliminate some of these business models instead of trying to improve them? You might outright invalidate a business model. Not every business model is going to work. So you may think, I'm going to go to doctors and sell them a better file sharing solution. You go there and they say, guess what, we already have one, and we're very happy with it. And everything you're doing, we can do a lot more than what you're providing. So why try to go and pursue that market? So you can have complete invalidation, which is also fine, and that's why the process is not about guaranteeing success, but it's about getting the bad news early so you can conserve your resources and then double down on the one that will work. So along the way, you might eliminate those. When you do those demos, you might get the same kind of thing. You eliminate things, and then you want to go into that 2-phase validation. You build something small scale, so you roll it out and prove that the business model works in small scale, and eventually you scale it out. Also, you begin to narrow down. It's very hard to execute 2 different business models at the same time. In the earlier stages of your product, you can actually go and test them in parallel because we're doing a lot of smoke tests and we're doing a lot of these offer tests, which are easy to build, fast to build, fast to iterate on, fast to learn from. But when you really start building product, you have to, at that stage, start to narrow down, especially when you do this qualitative type of validation with your first MVP. So at that point, you're really picking a single business model that you're going to then execute on. That make sense? Do we have time for the short case study? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to kind of illustrate a very short case study, which is pretty illustrative of the process. And I'm not going to pick something very complicated like a software product or a hardware product. It's going to be the book that I wrote. And so I wrote the book very much using every technique in the book while I was writing the book. In fact, chapter 2 of the book is how I wrote the book using all the techniques in the book. So I went back and actually wrote that case study. So it's a good example because a lot of people can appreciate that writing a book is a massive, long process. And so I'll show you how we can apply the principles I just showed you to something like that. So going back in time, I talked about how I got into this because I had more questions than answers. I was more interested in finding this repeatable process for building successful products. And I ran into the early works of Steve Blank, Eric Ries. So I started a blog of my own. I took one of my products and turned it into a test bed. I said I would apply these techniques and I would document what works, what doesn't work, and refine from there. And that blog started to get readership. A number of people there liked what I was writing, and they told me that I should write a book because it would be very helpful for other entrepreneurs getting into this methodology, getting into this process. So at first I laughed that off because I said, you know, I'm too busy running my own company, and the blog is already hard to keep up with. A book is something you do when you go into the mountains, you take a sabbatical, write a book for 6 months. I don't have time for that kind of stuff. So I told him, thank you for I'm flattered, but you know, I don't have time to do it. But after about the 12th or so request, this is again where this is the idea of customer pull, where customers start asking for something because you're delivering value to them. The blog had become a sort of an accidental MVP. It was delivering value to some customers, and they started asking for this book. And so I decided to explore a little bit further. And so this is where the problem interview process comes in. I wanted to set up calls with these readers and understand who they were. I assumed they would be entrepreneurs, but what if they weren't? What if they were people who were just finding what I was writing funny? So I had to understand that they were really entrepreneurs. I also wanted to understand what they were reading. So I wanted to know that they had read Eric's work and Steve's work, because if they hadn't, if they discovered their work and all of a sudden thought my work was not good enough, then I would have a problem as well. So I wanted to make sure that my assumptions about who they were, what they were doing, about the problems that they had were accurate. So I set up these calls, and sure enough, these were entrepreneurs, and they knew of Lean Startup like me. They were struggling to put it to practice, and they found my stuff to be somewhat more actionable to put the stuff from the grounds up versus something that was already working, trying to figure out how to apply it to themselves. So I then took the next step. I had to build a demo for my product. So I had to build a demo for this book. So I created this teaser page, and it looked something like this at the time. So nothing fancy here, very dark background. That's because I did it myself. I'm not a designer. It took me half an afternoon to do it. You'll notice my great book cover is actually no book cover. It was just a stock image. And that's because, to me, the book cover was premature optimization. So I'm not saying book covers aren't important, but book covers are going to be what sells the book on a bookshelf. I wasn't yet on a bookshelf. So I wanted to test the riskiest thing, which was not the book cover. It was really the table of contents. So I put a book cover there so people knew I was writing a book, but it was not about what the book cover was about. It wasn't even about what the title was about. So I picked the first title that came to my mind, called Getting Lean. The final title is Running Lean, but I picked Getting Lean because that was the first thing that came to mind. And I set up these calls. I got them on the call, said, I'm writing this book. Here's a table of contents. Would you buy this book? And tell me what you like and don't like about the content. And that was very instructional because it gave me a lot of ideas. People talked about things that were bothering them, questions that they had, and I used that to refine the table of contents. The things they liked, they told me as well, and so I kept that intact. At the end of those 12 interviews, I went back to some of them and showed them a revised table of contents. All 12 of them said, yes, we will buy this book if you write it. So that's good early validation. Problem is, it's not a problem worth solving yet. So even if I sold 12 copies of that book on the spot, that would only be a few $100s, assuming I sold it as a self-published book. It wouldn't be enough to pay for the cost of writing the book. So to me, it was not yet a problem worth solving. And so I went and turned that teaser page into a smoke test. So this is where you can scale out that offer and you can try to test it in a bigger scale. And so my goal here was to get 1,000 email addresses from my blog. And my assumption was, if I get 1,000 email addresses and I'm selling my book for $20, $30, that would be $20,000 to $30,000, which would pay for the writing of the book, which I estimated as 2 to 3 months part-time. And so that's how I came up with that number. And so I went on this page and I changed a number of things. I did change the title because some people didn't like the Getting Lean title. And so I tested a few titles with them and ended up with Running Lean, which they liked better. And so I stuck with that. So this is where the customer conversation came up with that, with that name. Now, if I ask people, how many of you spend weeks, sometimes even months of your lives trying to find the perfect logo or brand, brand logo or the company name or domain name for your product, we spend way too much time on those kinds of things. So we should be so lucky that we have got something worthy of a good logo. So I would say prioritize testing that first, then trying to find that perfect name. The name is not as important as what you're going to be building, what you're going to be delivering. I also announced the launch date of this book. So this was in March of that year, which gave me 3 to 5 months depending on how you count the summer. So I said, coming this summer, I'm going to write this book, and I started to collect email addresses. So that's where I wanted to get to the 1,000 email address. And then I left this page up and did nothing. I announced it on my blog, and I went away and started working back on my product. So I did not try to write the book. I did not try to come up with a revised table of contents, did not do any other testing other than periodically monitor my results and then occasionally tweet things and promote things to get the email addresses. So until I got 1,000 email addresses, that was my tripwire. That was my trigger to take this project seriously. If I didn't get the 1,000 email addresses, I wasn't going to do anything about this book. So the thing is, I didn't get those 1,000 email addresses instantly. I got 100 of them pretty quick, but it took several months to get to 1,000 email addresses, and it wasn't until early summer when I got 1,000 email addresses, and that's when I said, crap, I have to actually go write this thing now. I have to go figure it out. So I went to write the first chapter of the book, and it was actually a lot harder than I expected. So again, entrepreneurs assume things are going to be easy. Even my readers said my blog posts are good enough. I just have to cut and paste them, change a few things, and I would have a book. And so I tried to do that, and I wasn't happy with the result. I didn't like what I had written as the first chapter because a lot of my thinking had changed. So I realized that my solution was no longer as easy as I thought it was going to be. So I had to come up with a smaller version of that solution, the minimum viable product. And that, in my case, ended up being this free workshop. So I went in Austin, which is where I live, and I announced a free running lean workshop. I was going to teach them about lean startup principles, how I was applying them, what I had been learning, and I got 30 people interested. So the lesson here is if you can give away something valuable for free, you sure as hell can charge for it. So that's where I said, let me announce a free workshop, and then I might follow up with some paid workshops. So I got 30 people interested. I didn't take all 30 people, even though I could fit them in the room. I only took the first 10. And that's the idea of small batches. You never burn your entire list. So if I took all 30 people and I delivered a really bad workshop, all of them would be upset and I would have nowhere else to go. But this way I had 2 more chances. If I delivered a bad workshop, as long as I didn't go and tell the others, I could get the other 10 and the other 10 and improve on it. Lucky enough for me, the first workshop was well received. People said they liked it a lot. They gave me good testimonials. They said they would have even paid for it. So I did some ad hoc price testing. And the next 2 workshops and several after that have been paid. And I did all kinds of price testing around that. And that's the second principle, is that the first form of validation is getting paid. So if you can go and build something valuable, a very quick way to see if that truly is valuable is put a price to it. And if people pay money for it, then at least they're voting with their wallets. It doesn't mean that they're going to love your product, but at least that's a first form of validation. So I decided to run these paid workshops, and I ran them all through the summer months. And through these workshops, I was iterating on the content. So I was writing my book, but not on pages, not on your classic chapter form, but in slideware. I was going back and changing these slides with every workshop, trying to make it flow better, trying to make it communicate better. And through the questions, I even learned a lot of things from the entrepreneurs. I would ask them questions like, what would you do in this case? They would give me answers, and that would go in my book. And their questions, I would try to find answers for and put them in the slides. So by the end of the summer months, I had a 500-page slide deck, which was essentially the outline for the book, only in slide form. So I was now ready to write this book, but there was still a problem, and that was that I'd promised the book in the summer, and the summer had come and gone, so people started asking me, where is this book? Are you still writing it? Are you interested? What happened to it? We want it because we want to use it for our startup, for our product. And so I went back to them, and I made a deal with them. I told them what had been happening, that this was not an easy project, so I had to go and run these workshops, but now I knew exactly what I was going to write. It's going to still take me several months to write it, but I'm going to make an offer to you. I'm going to make a pre-order offer. So if you pre-order my book right now, if you buy it right now, I will deliver it like I deliver a software product, because I come from a software background, so I had this idea. I will write 2 chapters every 2 weeks, and I will deliver it to you in that incremental form. And because this was a how-to book, you would have those 2 chapters you could apply to your startup. By the time you were ready for the next 2 chapters, I would have them ready, and you can get those 2 and apply them as well. So I thought this was a great plan. I put it out there. I went to the landing page and changed that up. So I went and added a coming soon instead of coming summer, because summer had gone. I didn't know when this was going to be done, so I just said coming soon. I had a pre-order option with a discount. In retrospect, I went and tested the discount. People didn't care for the discounts. I wouldn't discount anymore. I still had an email option. If people didn't want to pre-order, they could still get on the list for when the book was ready. I expected a lot of people. I expected 80% of the people to jump on this offer because they'd been waiting all this time. I only got about half my list, a little bit under half my list, to say we're going to buy this book. And so at first I was worried. I thought I lost I lost half of my list. They weren't interested in this book anymore. So I set up a few calls with them. And what I learned is that the reason they didn't buy was not because they were not interested in the book, but because they did not like PDF. They wanted to wait for the print version or the Kindle version or the iPad version. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and part of the reason was because, I mean, it's still half your list, and these are people who are, remember, these are not strangers on the web. These are my email subscribers. So these are people that I built relationship with for several months. They talk to me. They work with me. So yeah, I had to go and find out had they vaporized or what had happened. So I got them on the phone, and what they told me is that they were waiting for the final version of the book. And so that kind of helped me, you know, but even before that, I would say the first thing that I wanted to go do was to solve that problem. I said I can actually go and do these electronic versions. I don't have to just do PDF. I can do Kindle and iPad pretty easily. I have to hire someone to do all the conversions. But then I stopped myself. I realized that that was going to be more legwork. It was going to be more pain. I'd have to pay money to someone. I was going to delay my release cycle. And that's the third principle to keep in mind here, is that when you're looking at early adopters, you have to increase the sign-up friction a bit. So early adopters are, in many ways, as visionary as you are. They want to see the product built as much as you do, and they're willing to jump through a few hoops. So that was it became my filter criteria, my selection criteria. Those that wanted the PDF were people who wanted this content so bad they didn't care in what packaging it came from. Those that wanted to wait for that finished, you know, well-bound book cover-like product were those that were still customers, but they were latter-stage customers. So that's, again, a counterintuitive principle, is that your early adopters are people that can jump through a few hoops, and you don't always have to have the perfect packaging, the perfect product for them. These 2-week releases were incredibly helpful because they not only helped me to fix little typos and spelling errors, which are obvious, but I was doing content testing with real entrepreneurs. So because I was doing this iteration in small batches, I don't have that little thing, but I have this iteration in small batches. I was able to get feedback that was very effective. People were testing this on their own products. They were coming back after 2 weeks telling me what they liked, what they didn't like, and I used that feedback to improve the content. I even had some people go and redo my graphics, my illustrations, because they felt they were not effective enough, and they redid them and gave me new copies of them. So my readers were co-creating this content with me, and because of that, I wrote a much better book, and a much better book faster. An interesting thing happened when I was 3/4 of the way through is I got a publisher contact me, and this was out of the blue. They sent me an email saying, we know you've been writing this PDF, this book, we have checked it out, we like it, here's a book deal. If you're interested, let's get on the phone and talk, if you're interested to publish. And at first I was very confused, so I picked up the phone as quickly as I could, got them on the phone, and the first question I asked them is, why do you want to publish this book? Because it has no DRM control. It's all PDF, it's floating around. Lots of free copies floating around the internet. I myself leaked it out in several places. I went to Hacker News and gave people free copies and encouraged them to share it with everyone they knew. So as a marketing tactic. So I wanted to build awareness for the book. So I said, you know, I've done these kinds of things. You still want to publish this book? And what they told me made a lot of sense in retrospect. What they told me is that I had de-risked the book for them. So had I gone and talked to this publisher back in October of 2009, when I just had a small blog and an idea for a book, I may not even get their attention. And if I managed to get their attention, they would have to go and run their own market validation, and maybe they would publish this book, but chances are they probably wouldn't be that interested. But now that I had sold, at this point, 1,000 copies of the book on my own, it had demonstrated early traction. And I went and did some research, and most books, on average, sell 700 copies. So obviously, there's the bestsellers that sell, you know, millions of books, and then most of them don't sell any books. So the average book sold in the US is 700 copies. So I was already doing much well on my own, and so that's why for them this was actually a book that would probably have some demand. Plus there were some trending topics as well. This was on the topic of Lean Startup, which was growing, so they could connect the dots and see that this book would be a good collection for them. But this is a point also, this is the ideal time to go talk to your partners, the ideal time to go talk to your investors. It's also the time where you have the most leverage, where you can say no to them, and that's exactly what I did. I told the publisher I was not interested in going down this published path because it was going to slow me down. I was going to finish the first edition of the book, and maybe consider a print version with them, maybe consider a second edition with them. And so I shut off those conversations. I began to shop around for other publishers because it also gives you the ability to go do that. And I did all of that in parallel while I finished the book. So I finished a self-published version of the book, and I went back to that landing page I showed you, and this is where I now went and applied a little bit more effort, a little bit more design effort. So I got a designer to design the first book cover, did a lot of split testing to find the right cover, picked the one that worked. I went and got my early adopters. I went through the list. I found some prominent VCs on there, asked for testimonials. They were happy to give them because they had read the book as an early adopter, as a PDF, and they gave some great testimonials. I then switched gears. I froze the book and went into promotion mode. So this is where, even though I could endlessly keep updating the book, I decided to now focus on reaching my 10x goal. So which is something I talk about more often, is that once you have your 1,000 books sold, my next goal was to get to 10,000 books sold. And so I then went and did all kinds of campaigns, pay with a tweet, different pricing all over the world, to try to sell and promote this book. And that is the scale stage in the 3 stages that I described early on. And so that's how this book got written. And so just to finish the story off, once the book was done, I felt like I still had more things to say. And so rather than update that book, I started to update the blog, and I created an advanced newsletter, which I used to run more workshops. So the demand for those workshops, which were the MVP for the book, didn't go down. I expected once the book came out, nobody would be interested in those workshops, but people wanted more of them because they wanted to learn. They had more questions. They wanted to get more kind of face-to-face type interactions. And so I ran more of those workshops, which is something I do consistently to this day. And through those workshops, other things came out. So this lean canvas thing I showed you didn't exist when I started writing the book. It was throughout that process that it got built, turned into a product. The same thing with other products that I built. And then I did finally go back to a publisher. It wasn't the first one, but the third one I talked to that ended up being the right partner. And that's what the finished running lean book looks like. Okay. Questions? All tapped out. Okay.
Hi. The thing is, I appreciate very much what you told tonight. I totally can agree. I'm working for NOK, and we are providing the business plan competition here in the area. So, as you spoke a lot about what a business plan can't provide, I have to disagree at this point, because we are accompanying a lot of founders since 1997, and everything you said tonight is what we always say to founders. That you always need a proof of concept. Without proof of concept, which is, for me, another word of what you proposed, showed us tonight. It's a very structured way to get to your proof of concept. But you always need a proof of concept, and when you develop your product and your things, not looking after your customers, it never can work. So I don't know where the problem is with the business plan, because I think a business plan always has to be a very, very changing and open instrument. We always tell people you have to work with your plan. It's not fixed at one point. It's
but
only,
do they do it?
Yeah, they do it.
Well, so maybe I'll just I'm not going to attack the business plan's intent. I said the business plan's intent is right. You're supposed to create this plan, get your critical thinking down on paper. You're supposed to keep it up to date, ideally quarterly, monthly, all of those kinds of things. I have not met one entrepreneur who, once the business is launched, once they're funded, who updates that 60-page plan document. It should be the intent.
It starts with that. We don't say 60 pages, we say max 30 pages, because everything nice is, you don't have to be to write a prosaic essay or something. You have to focus yourself on the business plan as well. So that's
sure.
And what there's everything you told tonight. You need to work with also when you have a business plan.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to attack the business plan. So a business plan is an old kind of, it's an old format that's been in use. It's been successful. You know, companies like Apple created business plans. I'm not going to say business plans have no value, but I'm going to say the problem today is that many of the entrepreneurs, many of the younger entrepreneurs, forego any planning except if they are required or forced to do it. And as a result of that, they spend a lot of time. Even 30 pages takes, you know, maybe several weeks to write. One of these business model canvases or lean canvases can be created in 20, 30 minutes.
I consider what you told us tonight more like a philosophy every entrepreneur should have, because you know also if you work in a big company, it's always the approach, where are you producing for? Yeah, you have a really focused philosophy, and that's really.
Well, thanks. But I would say that at the end of the day, like we look at Lean Startup, we look at customer development, I would say there's not a lot that's new under the sun. I mean, if we look at all of seasoned entrepreneurs and many of those guys who were VCs, the thing they say is that, you know, I learned all of the things that are now being talked about as a Lean Startup, as running Lean, as customer development, as things I learned the hard way. And so a lot of these things are best practice that a lot of people end up at. What we're trying to do is accelerate the process so we can share those methodologies, those best practices up front, so that we don't spend a lot of time having everyone learn this the hard way. So some people, you know, write to me and say, I wish I read your book 5 years ago, and my answer is, me too. I wish somebody had written this book 5 years ago before I started, so I didn't have to make all those mistakes. So I do find that a lot of this stuff is not as much about being novel or innovative or new, but it's a repackaging of some of those best practices into something that's more practicable, that's something that's more easy to understand than has been in the past. Right. Any other thoughts, questions?
I have a short question.
Thanks. I think most entrepreneurs start with an idea of a product. Also, in your case with the book, the idea was already there.
Uh-huh.
Do you have any experience or learned about experience? What is your experience, so to say, starting only with the target group, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most people get hit by ideas. For some crazy reason, entrepreneurs want to act on all of them. So that's how we function. But if you look at the idea, it comes to us as a clear signal, but in it is mixed a bunch of things. And that's the first step, is we want to deconstruct the idea. So in that idea, we can deconstruct it at the lowest level. There's a pyramid here. As the lowest level is the vision, what it is that we want, what is the impact we want to have, what is the change we want to bring in the world. There's the strategy, which is how are we going to get there, and then there's the product. But the mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make is they run up that pyramid and fall in love with the product too quickly. So that's the mistake that we are trying to avoid here, is saying don't rush into that. You know, take the time to capture your vision first, talk about strategy. So Facebook did not have a unique vision. Everyone had the same vision of creating the largest social network. What they had was a unique strategy. So again, strategy is just as important, even more important sometimes than the vision itself. And then the product is one of the things that gets you there. So, but to answer your question more directly, I found some hacks. So when we talk about finding problems worth solving, the hack that I found that has worked for me, my last company was built around a big vision and falling in love with the solution, which were, I made all those mistakes of trying to, I became a technology solution looking for problems, looking for customers, and that was not a very good place to be. In the new company I built, I took a different approach. I said, let me find an area that I'm very passionate about. So it doesn't have to be, I'm passionate about entrepreneurship, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be cars, it could be cooking, it could be automotive, you know, it could be fashion. You find one of those things, you immerse yourself in that environment, you're going to find passionate people that are going to have problems. Everyone has problems all over the place. As the entrepreneur, you put your entrepreneurial hat and you try to solve those problems for them. And that's the best way, is to find not only customers, but customers with problems who you can maybe help, who you can maybe build products for. So I find that as a very good hack. If you end up finding one of those problems in your own domain, that's the scratch your itch type of a tactic. So I'm a developer, and I'm very inefficient because the tools are not good. So I'm going to solve that problem. That's a good way to also get started. But many times, being your own customer automatically disqualifies you as being objective, as not being biased. So you still have to get outside and validate that other people have that same kind of problem, and it's not just your myopic love of the solution that's clouding that problem definition. So hopefully that answers some of the questions.
There's a question here on Google Plus from Michael Williams asking how much money you actually need to launch a product, or if there is the need of a lot of money to get successful.
Yeah, the question is how much money do you need to launch a product? And so it's very hard to just give a blanket answer because maybe you're trying to build a fab, maybe you're trying to build a global solar farm in Africa, so that's obviously going to require a major investment. But for a lot of us who are building products, I would say that I'm a big fan of bootstrapping. I feel that you can go and get a lot of that early traction. You can go and show demand for products without a lot of investment. And at least in the US, a lot of the investors around the tech space no longer want to invest as a way to fund your development. They don't want to give you money to go build something. They want you to go and validate that this is something worth building first, and then they're happy to give you money to go execute on that plan. And even then, when they give you money, they don't give you millions of dollars anymore. There's a big trend towards lean investing or angel investing style, small tranches with very clearly defined success milestones. So if you have an idea, I might say, I'm going to give you 30,000 euros, go and find 10 customers who will buy this product, and then come back and talk to me. And if you find those 10 customers, I might give you another 100,000 or 200,000 euros to go build that MVP. Don't build your whole vision, build the MVP, and get those 10 customers to become referenceable customers, and then I'll give you more money. And so that's the new kind of investment. So I do find that you can stage roll out your products, and you can also do a stage investment, which is very good news, and that's why I find that this methodology in particular has a lot of effect with both entrepreneurs who for the first time now can go and iteratively test their ideas and don't have to build and hope something works. But it also has a lot of appeal for investors who in the past had to put big bags of money on the stake, and if it all went down the drain, they would lose all their hard investment money. So now they're doing a lot of smaller investments in a lot of different places and can play this game a lot more smartly, which is like the thesis of 500 startups. It's about doing these iterative, small, lean investment style approaches. Any other questions?
You're currently working on another book. Can you give a sneak peek? What is it about?
Yeah, so the second book that I'm writing is going to be called The Customer Factory. And the basic premise there is, as I put a lot of this, even most of these things that I showed you, what I found over the last 4 years, maybe 3 years since I wrote this book, is that a lot of people kind of nod their heads and say this is all common sense, it makes sense, but this stuff is very hard to practice, especially the step number 2 of identifying the key risks in your product to go test. And so my second book is really a way to answer those questions. And it starts with one fundamental insight, and that is that we are all in the manufacturing business. I don't care whether you're a B2B company or not-for-profit, whether you're a B2C company, we're all in the business not of creating products, but of creating customers. If you can create happy customers sustainably, reliably at scale, your business model is just going to work. And so that's the thesis of the book, and it uses some systems thinking. So the factory metaphor is not just a cute metaphor. It actually uses systems thinking. If you're familiar with theory of constraints, it starts to look at your business model as a system and talks about how you can apply those techniques to systematically build a business and automatically de-risk it over time. That's kind of the short summary of what that book will be.
This sounds like it's made for a rather broader audience, but if you could point us to some great resources for the very specific questions, like case studies and really in detail, how did they do X, Y, MVP, landing page, split tests, stuff like that.
Sure. So I would say that Eric Ries does a very good job. So he runs a Lean Startup conference every year. There's actually one that's starting next week, and hopefully there's going to be a live streaming option here in Cologne. But it's live streamed around the world, and there's also an event you can go to. But the main purpose of that is to showcase all kinds of case studies. So everyone from Dropbox to Groupon to Intuit, all those companies to General Electric, they all come and claim that they're applying these principles, these techniques in some way for their innovation, and they all come and share those kind of case studies. Some are better than others. Some are more a bunch of marketing fluff, but some are really good case studies. So, but I would say that's a very good resource. A lot of these are recorded, and you can go watch them. There's also the Lean Entrepreneur book by Brant Cooper and Patrick Blaskovich, which does a good splattering of case studies across many different domains, from hardware to software, and it starts to show how some of these techniques can be applied.
At what point would you suggest to open a company? Like, would you at the first stages just like check and don't make it official? Because if it's official in Germany, you have to do a lot of paperwork, and it's a risk, and it's expensive. And
Sure.
at what point would you?
Yeah, so
suggest it?
I try to shy away from giving any legal advice because I don't
Yeah,
know all
yeah.
the legal laws. So I'll put that disclaimer out there. So I don't know what kind of trouble you can get into if you. So obviously in the U.S. if you are incorporated, you have more rights. So if you work on an idea, you can have certain contracts in place, even though they're not very formal, with the people who are working with you. And so if you ever have a conflict, you have more defensibility, which is why some people, it's so easy in the U.S. to go incorporate. If you go into the Delaware type incorporation is like a Las Vegas of incorporations. You pay $125 online and you have a company, and you don't have to do much, and you have some standard papers with which you can start operating. So it's easier, but at the same time, all things being equal, I would say that is a form. If it's a lot of work and if you can get away with it without getting into legal problems, then by all means, go and try to find an idea worth incorporating, just like the logo, just like the logo and the brand name and all of those things, and then incorporate it. But again, I'm not going to say that's the right approach because there may be other legal considerations that you should consult someone more qualified on.
Do you have an advice for tackling the question how to make your customer want your product? Because I work in the insurance business, and we are creating a company to sell insurance products over the internet. The thing is, insurance, the market works in Germany, but there are products most people don't know, and these products are way cheaper than the usual insurance you can buy. But most people don't know why their insurance is more expensive than the other one. And so there is the problem of trusting you or trusting us. And yeah, do you have any advice on how to make the customer
want your product?
Want the product, yes.
Yeah, so is your value proposition cheaper insurance? Is that?
Yeah. On the one hand, there are some products that are cheaper, and there are other products where you save for older age, and you get more out of the savings.
Sure. So again, that's the idea of that value proposition, is that and that is the biggest challenge for startups. It's not even about building a great product, because you may build this great product in the forest, but if your customers don't pay attention to it, it's just going to die in that forest. And that's where that unique value proposition is all about, making a promise that your customers jump up and down and say, I want this. So in that nightclub example, going to someone who doesn't have a full nightclub and saying, I can fill your nightclub, is something they really want, something they really desire. In my mind, I would say if you have trust issues around cheap insurance, maybe there's this perception of price, and price is a very powerful thing. If I had bottled water here and I said one was €1, or if I say one was €3 and one was 50 cents, you may have this perception that the one that is more expensive automatically is better or purer. Others may not have that. So that is in some ways customer segmentation. So in your case, I would really ask, is price really is that unique value proposition strong enough? Like, are people dying to get cheap insurance? And as you said, there are trust issues. So if they do find this cheap insurance, do they feel like maybe it's not going to cover them well enough, and maybe it's an education problem?
Well, the big thing is not that it's cheaper, but that it's more transparent. Okay. Most people in Germany, they pay, how do you say it? They pay a provision with their monthly payments, but they may not know it. So we want to make the product more transparent, telling them you don't have to pay provisions with the monthly payment, but you pay a small amount in advance.
Right. So if I work through the methodology, the basic idea here is you want to find what are the things that keep your customers up at night. So if you put the problem around the insurance domain, if most people are satisfied with their existing solution, then you have to make an offer that's compelling to get them out of that comfort zone. But if they're not satisfied, whatever that pain is what you lead with. So that's why I was asking if it's really price or something else. But if you do think it's price, the next thing is to figure out how to build this offer and where to test it. So you want to figure out where your customers hang out. They're a lot like fish. So you have to figure out if you go fishing, if you want to catch different kind of fish, they're going to be in different parts of the river. You have to use different offers or different baits to get them. And so similarly here, if it's low price, you might run some, I don't know if Google Ads is the right channel, but I'm just throwing out some things. You might learn some Google ad testing that says exactly what you say. This is the more transparent. You try a bunch of offers, so you try a bunch of value propositions with taglines saying this is the transparent insurance system, know where your money is going type of thing, and see if people click on it. And if they do, try to talk to them, try to understand why they clicked, who they are. Maybe there's a different segment of people you can optimize for, and it's not your mainstream market. You just have to start somewhere. And when those guys get happy with your service, they tell all the other people how great your insurance service is, and they all come to you. So in the U.S., we had Progressive, which started out a lot that way. They were cheaper, they gave you the best prices, but they also created this brand of like reliability, and they had some good marketing around the way they were communicating their message. And now they're a very big brand. But I know when they first started out, maybe 10, 15 years ago, they were competing against all those big giants, and in many ways they created that early beachhead. So in the beginning, you can't try to get everyone happy. You can't market to everyone. You have to figure out who are the right early adopters that will buy into your message, and then you figure out how do you cross the early adopter to mainstream market a little bit later down the road. Sure.
Do you have any recommendation about those 1,000 early adopters? Because we're trying to build an iOS app specifically for the iOS platform, and we can't really tell if someone is an early adopter or not, because the target market is all iOS app consumers. So do you recommend, having a lot of friends, or having no friends, can you recommend working with strangers or friends?
Yeah, so I would actually recommend not working with friends, because friends tend to be more biased. They're going to tell you things that you want to hear, or tell you things that you don't want to hear because they don't want you to take risks, so they might convince you not to do this thing. So I really try to go as quickly as possible to real customers and real people that are a few degrees out. But the key part there, the whole part of this process is narrowing down your early adopter definition. And so you want to figure out, based on the problems you're solving, who would most acutely jump up and down to want to have this solved. So in my book example, I wasn't trying to go into the bookstores and sell my book there, to people coming out of the bookstore. I had people on my blog already, and if they were reading my blog content and they wanted to buy my book, those would be the early adopters. If they wouldn't buy my book, nobody else would. So that would be how I would characterize that, is figure out either the channel that you can reach most effectively that would have this pain, or the channel that so you can start your learning, or the channel that has this pain the most, and you want to segment down. Just like Facebook, you may have this vision of having everyone with an iOS app, but if you start there, you're not going to talk to anyone. So instead, narrow down, find out who you can talk to, establish that beachhead, and then build from there.
So, okay. I have a last question for you, because I think most of us like the idea, like the process, like the feedbacks and the stuff that's behind it. But what advice can you maybe give us to apply it really, to live this running lean way when we build our companies, our products?
Sure. So I would say that the biggest mistake that I find people make is they have, and I'm not going to say passion and determination aren't good things. You need that to survive. But try to suspend your passion for your solution, even if for a little while. You entertain the possibility of trying to find something a bit more creative. So rather than building this full solution, try one of these offer techniques. Try to see if anyone would even have interest in your product before going down the path of building it, which is usually the number one reason why these products fail, the number one reason why we go astray. But then beyond that, I do encourage you, this is the beginning of this Lean Startup Circle, I do encourage you to come back, find your own voice. There are lots of formats. You can get people all over the world to Skype in and give you, more content, but you can find that content online. So I do encourage you, instead of just kind of getting people here to come and talk about the same thing you can watch from your home, is to start sharing your own stories, start bringing in your own business models and talking about it and finding ways to go test them. and there are a lot of now resident experts here that can guide you along the way. So that's, I think, a good way to get started.
Yeah, so that is what we will try to do. So you can go to the Facebook fan page. That's, I think, the first thing we have established right now. Other channels will follow. So Lean Startup Cologne is the name. Right? No. Okay, thank you very much, Ash.
Thank you.
Give applause. Yeah, and now you can just mingle around, drink some beers, have fun.